The United States of America, a prosperous, free nation full of opportunities for immigrants. But did you know that these immigrants represent the engine that made this great nation what we know today? Yes, despite the limitations, stigmas, and stereotypes that immigrants still face, they were the ones who took the hard work with their hands, turning this territory into practically the main playground of the entire planet. Not only economically but also politically, socially, and highly culturally rich. Do you want to know how this phenomenon happened? Well, to summarize the story for you, before its independence, the US was simply an extension of England on another continent. Many countries tried to conquer these lands. Despite this, in the 17th century, England took control of the eastern part of the territory and quickly started to populate the Atlantic coast. However, it did not take long for the winds of revolution to begin to form within the American nation, achieving independence from England on the famous date, July 4, 1776. During the next 2 centuries, 14th and 20th centuries, the United States did not stop receiving immigrants from all over the world, fleeing from crises and looking for better opportunities. These immigrants quickly got jobs in the big industries, becoming the workforce by excellence and making the industrial power of the United States more solid. By the way, aren't immigrants, especially Latinos, still the workforce that raises the large American industries? How I was telling you, the frequent migrant waves became the central point of the country's development. In fact, for a long time, the US depended on this foreign flow to populate its vast territory and build industry after industry. To give you an idea of the migratory flow that existed in the United States, in the last population censuses carried out, were identified more than 60 classifications of races. American Indians are Native, American European, American African, American Asian, Hispanic or Latino. Yes, I know. Hispanic or Latino, it's confusing and imprecise to use these two terms. Especially since the only element in common between these two groups is the Spanish language. For example, Americans consider Spanish Europeans as Hispanic or Latino because they speak Spanish. Instead, they exclude Brazilians from this term because they speak Portuguese. Returning to the subject, the first Latinos to touch US soil were our Mexican brothers. All of this began with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. What was this agreement? Well, the treaty determined that Mexico would hand over more than half of its territory, what is now known as California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, and parts of Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma, and in exchange for this, the United States would pay $15 million to the Mexican state for damages during the Mexican-American War. In other words, the US bought these states while Mexico was going through a rather complex political and economic situation. But if you wonder, what happened to the Mexicans who lived in that territory? Few of these kept their Mexican citizenship, while the majority decided to settle in the new American territory. Over the years, more and more Latinos joined the phenomenon of mass migration. Among those are Latinos from Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, El Salvador, Colombia, Venezuela, and Mexico, of course. So, how big is the Latino community in the US today? Well, we tell you that according to the United States Federal Census Office, Latinos outnumbered the African American community. Which means that the Latino community is the biggest minority in the United States. In fact, the 2010 census determined that in the last 10 years, the Latino community increased by 43%. Reaching 50.5 million people, that is, more than the total population of Canada. Finally, by 2018 the number had risen to 59.9 million. And if we are a larger population than Canada, why are we a minority? Experts on the population phenomenon in the United States respond to this. Considering Latinos should no longer be considered a minority, being a large and active community within society, the United States has changed the way it views itself. But what motivates Latinos to immigrate to this great nation? The reasons are many. Beyond personal reasons, Latin America could be characterized by its political, social, and economic instabilities. This situation has led its inhabitants to look for security, financial stability, political freedom, and above all, the opportunity to provide them with a better quality of life. To his children, and of course, they have. According to the Pew Research Center, second-generation immigrants, that is, Americans of Latino immigrant parents, currently make up 10% of the adult population. 67% consider that their quality of life is better than their parents during this stage of life. This cultural influence is so hard that even Latinos created their communities and cultural spaces. But the most important Latino cultural contribution is Spanish, becoming the second most studied language in schools, surpassing French. It is also thanks to the media targeted and adapted for Latinos. Today, Spanish is spoken in 41 million homes. It means that in 40 years, 1 in 3 Americans will be Hispanic. According to these figures, it seems that the United States is on its way to becoming the second country where the most Spanish is spoken, after Mexico. Latino culture is remarkable to everyone on American streets, especially in the states where the biggest communities are established, such as California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico. Although its expansion has been so rapid that you should not be surprised if you see Latino communities in smaller cities such as Virginia, Indiana, and Wisconsin, to name a few. But how has this community contributed to the American economy? As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, immigrants have always been the workforce that has moved the industries and the economy of the great nation that is currently the United States. But more than the workforce, currently, the Latino community is the one who contributes nothing more and nothing less than a GDP of $2.3 trillion. That is, if the entire Latino community in the United States were a country, it would be the 8th economy in the world, surpassing countries such as Brazil, Italy, and Canada, according to a report published by the Latino Donor Collaborative Organization. Experts from California Lutheran University and the University of California at Los Angeles. In fact, according to that same study, the value of the possessions and services of Latinos in total went from $1.7 trillion in 2010 to $2.1 trillion in 2015, and stood at $2.3 trillion in 2017, the last year for which figures are available. The purchasing power of Latinos is growing more and more. These figures exceed the value of goods and services in countries like Italy, Brazil, and Mexico, being only behind the mega powers of the world: the US, China, Japan, Germany, India, the United Kingdom, and France. But what does this economic surge do? The Latino legacy in the United States. Finally, as history shows, the stereotype that teaches the Latino only as a laborer and even underpaid is only a little part of the whole truth that Latinos represent in the United States. A notable group of Latinos has attributed decisive elements in important spaces such as science, culture, art, politics, the media, and finance. From Ezequiel Cabeza, the first Latino governor of an American state in 1916, to Alejandro Mayorkas, current Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States, there is countless Latino names, among governors, mayors, judges, senators, and congressmen, who are among the characters who have been in charge of giving a voice to the Latino community, within the world of American politics. And not only within the United States but literally outside of it. In 1986, Dr. Franklin Chong Diaz became the first Latino to fly into space as a NASA researcher, but his work did not end there, but he also became the astronaut with the highest number of flights in the United States space shuttles. Franklin Chong Diaz paved the way for the next 20 Latino astronauts who have traveled to space as members of NASA and thus demonstrated that there is no impossible dream either inside or outside our native borders. No condition limits you to reach where you want to arrive. The Latino media has been another sample that has left the Latino legacy in the United States. This nation has had more than 400 publications in Spanish that have been owned by Latinos, many of them with a big impact and historical weight. Such as El Diario de Los Angeles, the most widely read newspaper in Spanish in the United States with more than 94 years since its foundation, or El Diario La Prensa, which is the oldest Spanish newspaper in the United States, with 95 years of foundation in New York City. Finally, there is El Diario Las Americas in Miami, whose founding year was 1953. Without mention TV networks such as CNN en Español, Univision, and Telemundo, this one was directed and produced by the NBC consortium. Universal, one of the largest television production companies in the world. But definitely, the greatest bastion and legacy of the Latino community is in its finances. Their purchasing power has made the Latino citizen the desired consumer for large corporations, even for non-Latino medium and small businesses. As you know, all this has made possible a very diverse Latino business community in products and services. There is nothing you cannot find in the Latin market. If you don't believe us, we tell you that in the United States, there are more than 4.4 million Latino-owned businesses that generate more than $700 billion annually. According to the Census Bureau, more than 500,000 of them are in Los Angeles alone. And it is that many of the Latinos not only need to pay for the lifestyle that a great nation such as the United States provides them, but their families are in their countries of origin, who in many cases depend on family aid remittances. These remittances, today, are the mainstay of many Latin American economies, as in the case of Mexico, whose total amount of remittances in the first 5 months of 2021 was almost $20 million. There is no doubt the future paints a favorable view for the Latino community, which every day occupies more spaces of influence and projection in the United States, demonstrating that with vision, desire, and hard work. If you've been interested in learning more about Latinos in the United States, we invite you to click the subscribe button and activate the bell so YouTube announces you a new video each week. If you want to read more content like this, you can go to our website www.americatino.com, where you'll find articles on entrepreneurship, finance, migration and more. Finally, we ask you, do you think the United States is heading for a Latino-dominated economy? We read you in the comments.